All right, Pam, I have started the recording if you would like to go ahead and get started with our webinar.
Well, okay, thanks, Tracy. I was hoping you might do a little more introduction on that because we didn't talk about this ahead of time. But I'm glad that we have some people from the Mind in the Making cohort joining us today, and I hope other people are going to watch this because it will be recorded, and I think Joe will be able to upload it when we have it prepared. So today we're going to talk about project planning and management, which I hope you will find useful as you're working on your projects. So today, we'd always like to talk about what we're going to do today. First, we're going to check in and ask, how is your team doing? So be thinking now and get ready to type some things in the chat box for those of you who don't have microphones so you can update us on how your teams are doing. Then we're going to talk about the learning outcomes that we expect to do, and then we will talk about project management. Briefly. It'll be a project management 101. We're not going to go into huge in-depth study of it because that could be an even longer webinar. But we will talk about phases of project management and why is it useful. Then Tracy's going to take over and talk about starting with the end in mind and getting into the details with logic models and planning that way. And we'll talk a little bit about evaluating success, and if there's time, we'll talk about Asana as one example of a project planning tool. So I will also be watching the chat box because I have it open and available to see. So if you have things, I'll keep watching it and we'll do questions. If you have any questions or comments along the way, don't hesitate. And Cindy, if you want to jump in with your microphone, you are free to jump in anytime also. So let's talk about what we're going to do today, or what we hope you will learn today. We are hoping that you'll get a basic understanding of project management and some of its practices. Possibly, we'd like to think you can identify success and build a project that attempts to achieve those outcomes. We're hoping you'll learn about logic models and how to use them in planning. And we're going to show you Asana, which is just one tool. There are others out there. So first off, let's just start and see how are your teams doing. So enter your little comments in the chat box, or Cindy, if you want to jump in and tell us how your team is doing.
I have to find my, I just sent an email out to everybody with all the details, so I'm trying to find that real quick so I can actually, let's see here, Mind in the Making, so much. Okay.
And while you're looking, I just want to ask Marissa, where are you from? Because I don't remember.
Helena.
Ah, okay. Thank you.
Okay, I found it. So let me just jump in quickly. We met last week. So we have Bozeman and Belgrade. We've decided to team up together. And we're lucky enough to have, gosh, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of us. So Three Forks has another group, and they're going to do 7 2-hour sessions of Mind in the Making training from September to December. And then what Bozeman and Belgrade is going to do is we're going to start, we have a Best Beginnings Council here. It's called Early Childhood Community Council. We're going to present the introduction from our Mind in the Making workshop to the entire membership of that Best Beginnings Council, as well as the leadership committee there. And so that's on Wednesday, October 17th. We're going to do that for our noon meeting. And then Child Care Connections is going to do an introduction to all the daycare providers and their whole membership of doing people in childcare. So we're going to do that this fall. And then starting in January, on Tuesday nights from 6:30 to 8:30, we're going to do 4 2-hour sessions. I am reluctant to do 7 2-hour sessions. I don't know if we can get people to come 7 times. So we're going to try for 2, and we're going to do it every other Tuesday. So 2 in January and 2 in February. And then what we did is we took the chapters and we looked at what would work best for, you know, how we're going to do that. So what we're going to do is do those introductions in the fall with a here's what's coming up in January and try to get people to come. We're going to try to get credit, you know, from Child Care Connection. So a lot of these daycare providers can get credit for doing that, CE credit. And so that's where we are. We're just going to try to do a Mind in the Making training with the 7 of us all choosing a chapter or 2 that we kind of dive in deep and do. Each of us do that. So
Neat. That sounds really good. That sounds like you guys are making some good progress.
well, we meet every month just so we remember, like, to keep moving forward. Because a big issue, and I talked to Amelia about this, and I don't know if Martha and Marissa, you're having the same issue, is to go to a training and then jump into summer reading means that you have to put, we had to put Mind in the Making sort of aside, because then we're full on busy every minute and we can't think about anything other than summer reading. And so when Amelia and I, and Tracy, you're aware of this, I know when we were talking about doing a rendezvous again, I said it's really hard to do a rendezvous and then have summer come because you don't have time to implement any of the cool things you just learned. So we're looking at doing a rendezvous in like end of August or September so that summer's behind us and we can, you know, learn stuff like we did at Mind in the Making and immediately implement it while it's still fresh in our minds. So that's why we chose to continue meeting every month over the summer, just so that we would like keep it somewhat in the forefront of you know, what we were doing and keep working towards this goal. So that I hope is working for us, and by October we'll be ready to at least do the introduction and start diving into what we're going to do in the winter.
That makes a lot of sense. That's probably a good idea because that's what Marissa's comment was, that summer reading took over. So they're kind of
absolutely.
And yeah, that does make a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Martha commented that they're doing great. They had a planning meeting yesterday for the Mind in the Making trainings this fall on November 2nd and 9th. They'll be training WIC staff, home visitors, and library youth services staff. So that's a nice update from her also.
So Martha, how are you going to do the 2 trainings? Are they going to be like how long? I'm having a hard time wrapping myself around the sheer amount of information and how much we can ask people to come. And, you know, because we did it in 3 days. So, so I'd be curious to know how you're planning to kind of structure that.
Do those? She's doing 2 half days.
Oh yeah, good.
So that would help. Yeah, wow. She said they had to wait for fall because of home visiting staffing. It turned out to be a good thing because of summer programs. So, yeah. And I know you guys can read the chat, but I'm just reading out the chat. So in the recording, people who watch the recording can get the information too. Martha
I
says,
agree.
We did the math and figured they could trim 5 slides or 5 activities from each module.
Yeah, we're going to do the same, and we're going to try to keep it. So ours is going to end up being about 8 hours long, which is going to be similar to your 2 half days. So I agree. I think you can do that without compromising quality, Martha.
And Marissa says oopsie, it went by me so fast. The ECC, Early Childhood Coalition member here, will be getting a survey this fall and choosing what would be most relevant for those members. We've talked about offering a book club, training for credits, or offer a kit with resources that would teach and promote these life skills.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good idea too.
Marissa, we did a book club when the book first came out, so we're talking several years now, and we just did a chapter at a time, and we supplemented that book club with, we actually got our hands on the little videos that I think are so good, and we supplemented our discussion with those. So it is one way to to break up the sheer amount of information. That worked well for us.
That's great. Those are really good reports. So I hope people who are watching the recording later can identify with what you guys are doing and maybe get some hints from what you guys are doing too. And Amelia has joined us also. Hi, Amelia.
Hi, Amelia.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Hello, everyone.
So we'll move on now to the main event, Project Management 101. So get ready to type a little bit. Oh, sorry, Martha has another comment. Julia Meyer has also been visiting our infant story time and highlighting one life skill per week. Our attendees really enjoy her visits. Ooh, nice. Okay, get ready to type or speak more because I have the first question in project management is, what is a project? Go ahead and just answer what you think a project is. How would you define a project? And I don't mind dead air space, it's okay. I'll wait for you to type.
We're typing.
Typing fast. But Cindy, you can answer because you have a mic if you want to.
Okay, so I think a project involves some sort of a goal you're working towards, and that could be a program, it could be a series of workshops, it could be a written, you want to write something up about that. So I think the goal can look different for everybody, but I think it involves a goal, and you take these steps to plan to reach that goal.
Excellent. And Martha has put in an idea with a goal that has a definable start and finish. And Marissa has said planning and designing something with a particular aim in mind. And those are all excellent. This kind of standard accepted definitions a lot of times of project is that they have a definite start and a definite end, like Martha said. They are temporary, they're not ongoing, but they have a specific lifespan, I guess we could say, and they produce something unique, a unique result, a unique product, depending on what you're talking about. And like Cindy says, it involves a goal, program, workshop, publication, etc., and requires planning. And that's true. So a project is not an ongoing long-term thing. It is a specific, unique, concrete event or undertaking. So the next question that I have for you, so get ready to type some more, is why is management, we'll say why is project management important? Why are we talking about it today? And some of these things do take a little longer to type, so it's okay if you're still typing madly away. Oh, Amelia, very clever. Amelia says, someone's got to drive, otherwise the car won't get anywhere. And with a good driver, a lot can get done. And that's excellent. That's a lot of the basic reason why we have management, project management, is that it brings in some leadership and direction and helps with the plans and expectations. Martha says it defines the scope, states deliverables, states exclusions and assumptions, creates a timeline, and keeps team members accountable. That's excellent. I think I want to actually capture this chat and keep that for future reference because that's great. Cindy says if it involves others, it is necessary for all to know what they are responsible for. It also helps when evaluating what worked and what didn't. That's excellent also. Those are all really good reasons why we have some management, why we undertake management. So moving on, we'll talk about the 4 phases of projects. And we start with conception and initiation. And this is, and before we even get this far, I just want to say that most of everything you're doing in the project happens early on. So it's very top heavy in the early stages of these phases. So the first stage or two are very like labor intensive, and there'll be a lot of work in there, so that by the time you actually get to beginning the project, most of the hard work has been done, so you can get started. So in this first stage, this is where you're doing, asking the question of what's the problem that you're talking about, and why do you need something? Who are you targeting? Who is your specific audience? What does a successful project look like when it's all finished? And what deliverables are you going to try to produce or end up with? A lot of what Martha had said earlier about the deliverables and the assumptions and exclusions, that's all what you start out with the conception and initiation step of this. This is a good time where you can talk about what risks, what are the problems, or what things could you run into, what would be some obstacles that you might come up against. And I also have heard and saw this in another video that I was watching, is when you, at this point, this helps you develop the statements of why this project should even be supported by funders. So if you need to go out and find some funding, you at least have this part already thought through and kind of put down into something where you can present it to other groups if you're looking for funding. And I thought this is nice because it would help you kind of make the whole plan a little bit more concrete instead of, oh, this is a great idea. This would give you some reasons why you could say this was a great idea. Any questions about that or comments about this step? This one makes sense to everybody? So now that you have done the first step, now it's time to get a little more specific, a little more concrete, and do the define and plan step. And this is where you'll actually create the team that's going to work on this project. You'll identify the stakeholders who have an interest in it. Be specific about your deliverables that you're going to put out. And this is where you can, like Martha had said, create the timeline and benchmarks so you know what you're working towards. It's important when you're doing this to think about evaluation. We always think about evaluation at the end, but really evaluation should be in the very beginning steps of your project. And maybe you already have some kind of needs assessment that you have done, or you're going to do one right off. So that gives you a baseline, a starting point for your evaluations later on, so you can compare and see how things went. This is the step where you want to come up with a manager who's going to be overall taking care of this project. It's really nice if you can have somebody who is kind of neutral and can be objective so that things go smoothly, instead of they want to try to make it go the way they want it to turn out. Sometimes it's hard to get the objective person. It depends on your group or what your project is. But the manager will be able to facilitate getting all the groups working together if you have large little sub-projects, tasks that will go with this. You might want to start at this point getting your funding and creating a project charter, which has come up in some other groups that we've been in. It's kind of a written contract so that everyone's informed, and this is what part of Martha had said also, of keeping everyone accountable, defining the whole project. Your budget and things to think about in the budget. There are 3 factors in the budget. There's the time, the quality, and the money. And so if you're trying to be really fast, your quality might be lower, and if you have less money than your quality or your time, they all kind of factor into each other. It's like that little 3-legged stool we always talk about. So keep those factors in mind when you're thinking about the budget. You also want to come up with a communication plan at this point so that you know who needs to know what and how often you're going to be communicating with everybody, or the manager will be communicating with everyone, because communication is a big factor that you want to keep in mind so that everybody knows what's going on. And we already talked about some timelines and milestones and sequencing. Sometimes there's some things that have to be done before other things can happen. So if you can see that ahead of time, that does help the project go a little more smoothly. So you can see that there's a lot that has to be done in these first two steps. And this can take a long time. That sometimes you don't think about that. You don't think that it can take longer. You want to get started and you're anxious, but taking the time to do this will, in the long run, make the project go a little bit better. Any comments or questions about these two steps? So we'll move on. And now you've done all the hard stuff and you're ready to go. And Marissa says, yeah, revising timelines happens a lot, and that's exactly right. But if you have it laid out, at least you have a good idea of how it's going to affect your project. Cindy asks, will you share evaluation ideas with us? I don't know.
And actually, Cindy, I think that's going to be the third webinar. It's measuring success.
Oh, good. Good,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Because you said, you know, in the second part, you should be thinking about evaluation. And so that's where we are now, is in our defining and planning. So I'm thinking it wouldn't be a bad idea for us to start coming up with some evaluation tools. Thinking about those now. So yeah, I'll be patient and wait for webinar 3.
Yeah, and at least having something in mind already, like needs assessment or whatever, so you have a baseline that can help with your evaluation. So keep that in mind. So now we're just launching and executing, and keep going and just keep evaluating along the way in case you need to revise. It's also important to keep communicating so that people know where you are all along the way, so there's no surprises. The other thing to think about is who is authorized or responsible for any kind of changes that may come up, because things come up all the time, no matter what kind of project you're working on, and somebody has to be in charge of approving changes. So you might want to put that, you know, in your earlier planning and defining section so that people aren't surprised when they say, oh, but I thought I could make this decision, or I thought that would make sense to change this. That's a problem that could come up if you're not communicating well. So communication is really important. And now that you've had all this time to work on your project and it's just going along great because you've done everything perfect, the project's finished, it's completed, and now it's time to close the project and do a little more evaluation. And this is where you can report your successes, talk about some lessons that you learned perhaps, and it's a good idea to celebrate. If you have done some kind of project, make a little celebration for the team so that they know that their work's appreciated. People know that the project's done. Something else to consider is make sure you include some kind of handoff plan there so that who's going to be responsible for this project in the future, if it's something that you're going to continue with or you want to continue, or you've got something going really well and you have a great audience who really enjoyed it. You just don't want to dump them off. You want to have some kind of plan to let people know it's going to move into some kind of ongoing service, or how it's going to proceed in the future, but you want to include that in your closing and evaluation. So think about sustainability as you're doing that. Any questions about these phases? Okay, now it's time for Tracy.
Thank you, Pam. And thanks for that 101. That actually was really helpful for me, because I don't know about the rest of the people on this webinar, but I sort of just fell into project management, and I've never really had any formal training in it. I've just kind of pulled things together as I needed them. So it was actually great to just kind of have you walk through the 4 phases. So I said start with the end in mind, and if any of you have ever read Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective Leaders, this is one of his habits. And it really ties in with phase one of what Pam had to say, of the thinking about what it is you're trying to achieve before you actually start your project. And I started here because it is so important, and because it's actually really critical if you decide to use a logic model as one possible project planning tool. Because the idea behind this is like, what are you trying to do? What problem are you trying to solve? What goal do you have? And knowing that at the beginning helps you determine what your project is and what you need to do to make that happen. So Pam, if you'll go ahead and advance to the next slide. We're going to talk about logic models as kind of one way of pulling all of this together. And in many ways, kind of this is, you're here at this point of logic model when you're ready to get everything written down or in your computer saying this is what we're going to do with our project. And I like this image in the sense that it's very easy to understand and follow, but one thing I don't like about it is it implies that this is a linear process and you should start left to right. And I think in our lives, we often, and with different projects, we often do think about, here are the resources I have, here's what I'm going to do, and here's what I hope happens as a result of that. Really what I want to tell you is you're technically supposed to go right to left. You're thinking about what it is you're trying to achieve and then building your project to try and achieve that. But knowing that the human brain works left to right, I'm going to start on the left as I kind of talk through this. So the left is the most concrete. It's the resources you need to get the work done. So once you've gone through those 4 stages that Pam mentioned, you should know roughly how much money you need, how much staff, how much volunteer time, supplies, and equipment. And then you think about what is it you're trying to deliver. And many of you mentioned training, that was one of the things you wanted to basically relay what you learned at Mind in the Making to others who work with children to try and help spread the influence of this early learning and executive functioning skills. That's your deliverable, whether it's a book club or it's the training itself, that's what you're producing. And so that's an output. That's kind of from that operational perspective. One of the things we sometimes trip on as librarians is we think that the people who attend that training or the people who read that book is an outcome, but it's not. That's actually another output. That's a quantitative measure, and it's important because it helps you when you're talking to stakeholders, helps them understand how much influence you might have had, because maybe 50 people came through your training versus 2. It's also something that our funders tend to recognize. They like numbers. But it is just an output. Whether or not they attended your training doesn't indicate anything other than they were there and they must have been interested. Outcomes, which is the next box, is about what they did with your training. So did they learn something and did it change their behavior? An outcome is from the user's perspective. So it's about the individual who came to your session or attended your book club. And it's about whether or not they saw a change in knowledge, a change in behavior, a change in attitude, or a change in status. When we talk about evaluation, which is the 3rd webinar, which I'll just touch on here because of your timeline, Cindy, we kind of ask ourselves, how will we know if someone who's attended a session had a change in behavior or a change in attitude or a change in knowledge? And we think about what data we would collect to figure that out. And you can do surveys. Sometimes it's really helpful if you have that luxury to at least do a few interviews of people to just see if they actually exhibited a change in behavior. Your own observation is an acceptable data point. So you don't just have to survey people to death. You can actually just observe them if you have that luxury. And if you notice a change in behavior that's going on, you can record that as a reflection of meeting that outcome. And then finally, the last box on this logic model is the impact. And that is what they call from the stakeholder perspective. in the previous slide, it was worded like, what does that person knowing the 7 executive functioning skills do for the community as a whole or for a family? And so if, as you can see from the list on the screen, these things tend to be maybe larger issues facing our community or just aspirations of our community. And so they really resonate with stakeholders. Stakeholders care more about the overall impact of your work with these 7 executive functioning skills. Like, they care that maybe there are lower dropout rates, or they care that there's fewer problems in schools, that it's creating a culture where kids are resilient and they're able to succeed. That's an impact, and that is very much from that stakeholder funder perspective. The thing to keep in mind, because when I first took these trainings about creating value, is I was pretty overwhelmed by this impact. I think it's the stuff all of us care about, but how do we know that what the library did contributed to that, or what, maybe a daycare center did to contribute to that? The good news is we can get some of that just through stories of people who came to our events, but we can also often get impact information from national studies, and that's what, and Cindy can speak to this much more eloquently than I can, but when we were beginning Ready to Read and the whole early literacy initiative, we were leaning on nationwide studies and information that was talking about the power of these early literacy skills for kids and what it did for them over the long term. So you can use things like that to help explain the value of the work that you are doing. So that was kind of like my really fast introduction to a logic model. Does anyone have any questions about logic models? Yeah, that's what I was thinking, Cindy. So I would just say we are using logic models at the State Library, and this is partially why I shared this. It is just one project planning tool, and I always tell people, do what's right for you. The main thing is, did you think about what it is you were trying to accomplish? What difference are you trying to make? Did you build a project that helped you get there? And did you do the work? And however you get to that place where you're making that difference for people, that's fine. You'll find your own path. As I've presented this, even within State Library staff, some people love the logic model and some people are like, oh, I can't do it. They just don't. And that's fine, that they just don't work this way. Their brains don't work this way, and there's nothing wrong with that. You'll find your way through this process, but I did want to share this with you because I myself have found it very helpful as I've gone through. So let's actually do some practicing because both Pam and I like active learning. And so I happen to notice that kind of the theme of all of your projects was that training piece, or it may be in the form of a book club for Helena, but it's still that same concept of sharing information. And so we're going to try building a quick logic model for that. And you can see I'm starting with the user and what difference you want to make in the life of the user. So what is one thing you hope participants in your training or your book club learn, do, or change as a result of going to that training or going to that book club? And you can use the chat because I see Cindy muted herself too.
While people are thinking, I will just read Cindy's previous comment about she bets Mind in the Making has lots of good research to gauge impact. So, and I think there is. I don't know exactly where that is, but I know that they must have some.
Yes, I agree. It's really hard when someone asks you to write an outcome statement. Okay.
Exactly. Martha, I hope that service providers will feel more comfortable suggesting brain-building activities to caregivers. And Cindy says, I'd hope that parents and caregivers use some of the skills in Mind in the Making with kids.
Great. So Martha's outcome is about the service providers, and that is actually like a change in attitude and status, because it's about the service providers going from probably not using these because they don't feel comfortable to feeling comfortable, which probably leads to what Cindy's talking about, which is, I hope they use some of this with kids. And Marissa says, I'd like to see them apply the tools. And that's perfect. And one thing I would say is you don't have to create dozens of outcome statements. You can keep it simple. And the other thing I have learned in using logic models that's helpful for me is, I think I tend to be an idealist, and so I'm like, let's save the world. But it's really hard to measure whether or not we saved the world. And so there's nothing wrong with having short-term and intermediate outcomes. Short-term being they learn the 7 executive functioning skills, intermediate being they use those skills. Oh, and see, that's a great one, Cindy. That's a good example of a short-term outcome. Even if the participants just downloaded the Vroom app, that's showing that they're doing something, right? So here's my next question for you. I'm going to reword this actually. What does your attendees or your service providers using these 7 executive functioning skills with kids, what difference does that make for your community or families? That's the impact. Yeah, you bet, Martha, because it is pretty complicated. So we're saying I'm going to use the service providers one. We're saying we want the service providers to use these 7 executive functioning skills with kids. How does that make a difference for the kids? Why is that important?
Cindy's answer is, I think it gives providers tools to help kids succeed in school and life.
Yes. And I think what's really critically important about your statement, Cindy, is the end. Kids succeed in school and life. That's the impact. Perfect, Martha. Kids will be prepared for success in life. So you've moved from the individual human being, the service provider or attendee, applying these skills to the kids. And that's when you're moving into impact. And so when you're talking to stakeholders and funders, this is where you start, is you're saying, we are doing this because we want kids to be successful in school. And as Cindy mentioned earlier, Mind in the Making probably has some research to back you up. And so that can help you with getting funding as well as just getting support for your project. I would say I find the outcomes and the impacts to probably be the most challenging, to both get them worded in a way that I can actually try and measure them and be able to communicate them to others. I'm going to pause here before I jump down to the next 2 of outputs and inputs, because I see Marissa has also written, I would think that one impact would be that the kids will love to learn and our communities would support their love of learning. Then we support their well-being and their achievements in their future. And that's really nicely said, Marissa. I think that would be a very powerful statement to share. So once you've done the outcomes and the impacts, you get down to the concrete stuff. And this is where you're getting in that define and plan phase that Pam mentioned earlier. And so we've sort of talked about this and hinted on this, but what do you need to do to deliver or help your project achieve that outcome of service providers applying what they learned? What do you need to do? What are some of your deliverables? And these are some hard questions. You can see why Pam said the first phase is the hardest. plan programs, publicize, get people to attend. Yep. Any other thoughts? Sometimes I find this one helpful for really forcing me to ask myself, does this task really help me get to that place where service providers are using the Mind in the Making work? And that's pretty challenging. Offer the training, follow up with attendees, provide materials for implementation. Yeah, I agree, Martha. Follow up is really critical, actually, when you're getting people to change their behavior. It's actually why we have chosen to limit the number of attendees at our large trainings, is because we really want people to apply what they learned. Frequent check-in. Simple materials for training others. Yes, I agree. Okay. I was just going to make sure Marissa had time to chime in if she wanted. And Marissa, if you're like, Cindy and Martha covered it, that's perfectly okay. Consistently communicating our intentions. Yes, that's a great one, Marissa. I was reading something recently about the power of communicating what we intend and what we want from people. And, you know, Joe Flick is a wonderful educator at heart. And she told me, she said, if you want people to actually do what you're teaching them, just tell them that's what you want them to do. Because it's human nature to kind of want to live up to someone's expectations. So never doubt the power of communicating your expectations, although it's surprisingly difficult to do that sometimes. So last one's the easiest, right? What resources do you need to complete your project? I had you do all your heavy thinking at the beginning. Space, staffing, and time is what Cindy said. Martha, time, staff, and space. Anything else? No one said money. Ditto. A project leader. Luckily, it doesn't require much funding at this point. Exactly. I think the way that you're going is the clever, creative librarian way. Ooh, Martha, I do want money. Yes. It does make things easier. And one of the things I would say is if you do take the time to really clearly outline your outcomes and your impacts, that can help you get money because that's what grantors are often looking for. Does anyone know if the MITM merchandise is available yet? I do not. Do you know, Pam?
I don't know. That's an excellent question.
Yeah, we will find out and get back to you, Martha. Yeah, I
They've
will
been
ask.
emailing but haven't heard. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know if Amelia knows, actually. She might. You want the vinyl clings and card decks. Okay, good to know. I will make note that that's specifically what you're looking for. Okay.
Okay.
Right. So if
Should
you
move on?
Yes, I am. Thank you, everyone. So what you did was you just created a basic logic model that you can use for your project. So Pam is going to make me the presenter, and I am going to show you Asana, which is, again, just one tool for project management. And this is truly getting into the details because Asana is all about assigning tasks. At this point, you are in the launch and execute phase of your project. And so what you are seeing right now is our version of Asana. This is free. We purchased the premium version because we kind of loved what it could do for us and some of the features you get within the premium version. But we started doing this because, as many of you know, we have staff based all over the state of Montana, and we have the pleasure of working with each other on projects all of the time. And so we needed a system that allowed us to essentially plan out what tasks needed to be done for different projects and plan out who could do those tasks. And so I'm actually going to click on a couple of different projects. I will just start with Aspen, which is our new library directory. And so this is kind of the layout of what I was doing to prepare for going live for Aspen. And so Asana just allowed me to divide it up into segments, from testing period to what we needed to do before we went live, to publicity, to training, and to what we need to do after being live. And I am the only one on here because my other team members on this project are actually not library development staff. And so I just kind of basically left myself as the project lead, but you can see other people's names in these tasks. And so when I am completed with a task, I can just mark it complete. If I need to make a comment on a task, I can do that. And so Asana would allow you to create a project with your community members, and you can just use the free version. You would list out what tasks you wanted to complete, and you would assign it to the person who was responsible for completing it, and you can put a due date on it, as I've done with Aspen. And then you can actually converse with each other within Asana, either about an individual tasks, or you can actually just have a conversation with each other. And then you can also upload documents, although I would say I found that piece a little bit clunky. But it is kind of nice that you can also share files. And so this is just one tool that I find particularly handy if you're working with different people in different locations. You can use a simple Excel spreadsheet to do this exact same thing. You can use Outlook as well. We just wanted to share with you maybe a little bit more dynamic tool so you could kind of see what it looks like. There are some other online tools, like I believe Pam has used Trello, which is another option that you might want to consider. Honestly, I just kind of said yes when staff suggested this to me, thinking, hey, it's worth a try. And I have to admit, I've really appreciated it for certain projects that are very specific and time-bound. I find it incredibly useful just for remembering to get things done, and for being reminded when I need to get things done, and then for being able to assign tasks to others. So does anyone have any questions for us on this? I was going to kind of show you the Mind in the Making one so you could just see what it looked like. All right, so it looks like I have a little bit of time. Cindy, since you had specifically asked about this and the whole evaluation process, I wanted to pull up a logic model that we are using for a new certification pilot that we are trying out at the State Library. And you can see it has inputs, outputs, and outcomes. And then right beside the outcomes, there's now a column that says evaluation method and data collected. This is what Joe and I and others try to do to do that evaluation piece that Pam talked about happening in the design and plan phase. It's like we think about, okay, how are we going to know that applicants designed a rigorous professional development plan to advance their careers in librarianship? And so we kind of said, well, we can look at meeting notes, we can talk to the participants, we can look for evidence of rigor in the applicant's utility of the professional development plan. So we were kind of using a combination of talking to the people who were participating, of reviewing notes, and of organizing and observing what's going on. So I just wanted to kind of share this with you, just in case you might find this useful, Cindy, so that you can use it if you want. But we are going to be talking about this at the next webinar. And so I will go ahead and make Pam the presenter again.
Good, because I couldn't see how to take it back. So yes, the next webinar.
So here's the next webinar in the series, which is measuring project success. And Joe is very, very good at figuring out how to collect the right data, and also very good about timing it. So this will be a very helpful one for you. And in the meantime, if you're interested, I am happy to share our logic models with the evaluation method and data collected, just so you can see what it looks like and how we have used this in the past. And so I think our last slide is just kind of thanking you for taking the time to meet with us today and to just see if you had any questions overall. And like a bunch of chat flew by, and I do not have Pam's ability to stop midpoint. So I probably should look and make sure I didn't miss anything important.
They were discussing Amelia coming to some of the trainings, either in Helena or Bozeman or whatever. But Cindy did say this is helpful, and it shows a lot of ways to evaluate the project. So, yes.
All right, great. All right.
Did you want to stop the recording now?
Yeah, I will go ahead and stop the recording at this point.